Hello and welcome to the RIA Tech Talk podcast brought to you by RIA Workspace. I'm Todd DeRoca, and alongside me, as always, is David Kakish. And together we're on a mission to simplify the complex world of technology for RIAs just like yours. In the podcast, we'll be your tech guides breaking down those often confusing tech topics into plain old practical terms. And so we hope you join us in each episode as we dive into the latest tech trends, share our expert insights, and help you navigate the ever-changing world of RIA technology. Today, David, what is our focus today?
All right. Well, listen, Todd, good to have you on. Good to have the listener on. And today we are going to basically talk about, can I really run my RIA on Macs? We're going to, the title of the title of today's podcast is Macs for Financial Advisors. Can they meet your RIA's needs? And I'm always surprised at how often I get that question, because I think there's some you and I were kind of chit-chatting a little bit before the podcast. There's some historical context where it was a closed, Macs were a closed system. For many years, Macs did not work with financial advisor software. And then I guess the other thing is, a lot of times when people say, oh yeah, it works with Macs, it means it's turning it into a dumb terminal and it works with a Mac, right? So for those of you that are Mac users, or even if you're not a Mac user and you want to say, hey, can I really run a Mac, use a Mac with my RIA? And can I be secure? Can I be productive? That is the question that we are going to answer today. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on.
And so hopefully at the end of this, David, people will be able to breathe a sigh of relief, hopefully. So before we get into that though, so tell me a little bit more about, you hear this question a lot. And so what's going to add value to the RA who's listening to us? Why is this important? What's this going to do to help them do their jobs?
Yeah, sure. So a typical RIA, think, 10 employees, right? It's almost always the case that there's two people that are like diehard Mac users and are like, hey, I want to use Macs. And then companies are like, no, we're worried about security. We're worried about IT compliance. We're worried about you being productive and so on. And also, hey, our IT provider doesn't support Macs and, things of that sort. So it's a pretty big challenge for some RIAs. And again, there is some good historical context. By the end of this session, you're going to learn like, hey, can my RIA use a Mac? Is it secure? Is it productive? Am I going to have any compatibility problems, right? And we're not, we tend to be pretty agnostic. Again, neither Microsoft or Apple is paying us. I just want to put that out there,
Wouldn't that be cool if Apple did care about this? Like, here you go, David. Here's a big check. Promote us. No.
Yes. So, quick disclaimer. Yes, neither Microsoft nor Apple is paying us. We're pretty agnostic, and we'll share that. So, I guess to kind of jump right on in, why are some RIAs hesitant to use Macs? And it's a very legitimate concern, because the concern is like, hey, is it compatible with the financial software that we use? Is it secure? Will it integrate really well? And, does things like that. So I think to answer that question, I first want to talk about the productivity suite. And when I talk about the productivity suite, it's basically saying, hey, are you using Microsoft Office or using like the Google Workspace, right? Lots of RIAs, I'd say over 80% of them are using the Microsoft ecosystem. But just really quick, I'll talk about the Google Workspace. It's all a web-based platform by Google, so that's going to work really well on a Mac, right? There's no problem there. I'm really going to focus on Microsoft Office because that's the dominant player. That's the player that we support. If Microsoft Office is set up correctly, it can work really well with your MacBook. Okay. And what I mean by that is MacBook, Mac, really, any Mac out there. And as a matter of fact, I would even go and say iPads and iPhones and things like that too. But just kind of focusing on the Mac, if you're going to be using, and the Mac users know this, you're going to be using Office for Mac. You're going to be using Finder inside of, which is equivalent to like File Explorer. And that's going to work extremely well if it's set up correctly. And it works really well with the Microsoft ecosystem. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Todd, you are a Mac user, right? So you recently switched and you started using Office for Mac. Yeah. Yep. How was that experience? I guess let me ask you that.
It's good now. After I figured out how to get the desktop app to like sync over and all that stuff, it's fine. I think I don't like using the web-based or the web browsers because I have to open up a browser and then keep it up all the time. But no, I think the desktop apps, and again, I remember when Microsoft Office, you couldn't get it for Mac. And again, this was when I was in college. 10, 15, so many years ago. Yeah, you couldn't do Office on a Mac until they finally gave you a CD to install it in on. So yeah, so
You're
far it's good. Yeah, so far it's pretty seamless, nothing crazy. It does go to my phone and my iPad. So yeah, it's pretty
yeah.
solid.
Yeah, listen, the quick, and by the way, I didn't realize you're that old. You used to use CDs. Some of our younger listeners may not know what a CD is.
Oh yeah, man. I remember it came in like a DVD case and it basically had like yellow lined paper as the cover and it said Microsoft Word or Office Suite and it had the old logos when Apple used to make like these bubble letters or bubble
Yes.
icons. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. And we got a discount at since I was in college, you got a discount, man. That was a huge discount and it saved me some money, but yeah, I remember that. I had to freaking get a separate CD CD player. I don't know what you call
Yep.
it now, but yeah,
Yeah, CD,
CD-ROM. There
CD,
you
CD-ROM. Yeah, yeah,
go.
yeah. Our younger listeners don't know what that is, but so anyways, and also to be fair, there was a history of like Microsoft and Apple, not working well together and stuff like that. Here's the deal, and I'll dive into the details. If Microsoft Office is set up correctly on your Mac, it works flawlessly. And as a matter of fact, I'm traveling, and today I am actually using my MacBook to record this, and it works seamless. It works really well for me. So I'm talking about the Office Suite. Office Suite for Mac works really well. You use Finder. We have Finders, working with SharePoint. And again, on my computer, on my MacBook, I go to Finder, open up the files. I do everything I need to. I use Word for Mac, Excel for Mac, and so on. Now, let's talk about the financial applications like Orion, Redtail, eMoney, Advise-On, just, all the different financial applications that are specific to the RIAs. Most of these applications are actually web-based. And so what we set up our clients with is single sign-on for web-based applications. And so you open up a browser and then you can access all these applications securely. And as a matter of fact, even if you did not have single sign-on, you could still open up, Safari or Chrome or whatever your preferred browser is and access those web-based applications. Now, let's talk a little bit about server-based applications, and that's like a small minority of RIAs. There's maybe less than 20% that are using server-based applications, and there might be a business reason they're using that, right? They might be using like an older version of Juncture that has a lot of customization. They might be using like QuickBooks Enterprise, and they want to run that on a server-based application. That actually what we do with our clients there, and we set that up really well. We basically will set up what's called a cloud server, and then a technology called remote app. And then if I were using a server-based applications, again, think of QuickBooks Enterprise, it would be an icon on my Mac. And as a matter of fact, if I used Windows, it would be just an icon on my Windows. I would click on it, I would work. From my perspective as a regular user, it would feel like I'm using a web-based application, even though on the back end it's sitting on a server. Now, to be fair, this isn't something that you as an RIA would know how to do. It would require somebody that knows what we're doing. And I'd even say that most even IT providers don't even know how to set that up the right way. But anyways, a small percentage of RIAs are using server-based applications. And even if you are using a server-based application, it will work really well with your Mac. Because of the way that we set that up. So I want to recap something very importantly. The platform that our clients are using, which is powered by Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365, works incredibly well on the Macs. It works natively. You use Office for Macs. You use Finder, and it's all native. You do not need to use something called Parallels. You do not need to use a virtual computer. You don't need to use a virtual desktop. You don't need to use a cloud computer or terminal services or Citrix. You can, but if those solutions turn your MacBook into a dumb terminal. And so, many times IT providers will say, oh yeah, our solution will work really well with the Mac. You want to say, well, how would I use that Mac? Can I open up Office for Mac and work? If not, you're essentially turned your MacBook into a dumb terminal, or you turned it into a Windows computer. And if that's the case, you might as well just go out and buy a cheap Windows computer and use it that way. And so the benefit of this platform and working inside of a Mac environment is you get the Mac operating system, right? You want that look and feel and the experience of a Mac, and it's totally different than Windows. And honestly, at the end of the day, I'm pretty indifferent whether, people get into the, Mac versus Windows. And I go,
Oh
listen,
yeah.
you can use both, right? Well, you can use both and that's okay. It doesn't matter. And I'm the classic example, right? I'm the strange guy that 4 days a week I use Windows and then one day a week I use a MacBook. So I wanted to emphasize that because for the Mac users that are out there, they know exactly what I'm talking about using the native applications within the Mac and not turning it into an empty shell or a dumb terminal or a dumb computer, as we see out there. So, anyways, Todd, I wanted to give some context. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else or if you had some questions for me about that.
No, I'm agreeing with you on the interface and how I like to have it natively on the Mac. Yeah. I could, I like sometimes I'll do on a PC, but there is something about the Mac operating system and just how it looks, interface wise that it makes me less anxious. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. So I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, and then here's the deal. Like I said earlier in the call, like you'll take a company with 10 employees, an RIA with 10 employees. I am positive that there are two of them that are diehard Mac lovers and Mac users, and they want to use that MacBook. And the answer to that, that's cool. You could, and by the way, I should say this. That's very typical. You'll have 10 employees and two of them are using MacBooks and then everybody else is using Windows. It's okay. You can mix and match. You don't have to buy a MacBook for everybody, if you don't want to.
Sure. Sure. So let's talk about the security advantages and other benefits of using Macs in an RIA. Let's dive
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah. So I think the user experience and ease of use, right? The people that are very familiar with the Mac, that's a huge benefit for them, right? Like that's what they want. They want the Mac experience. They want to be able to use that. The total cost of ownership, right? You can debate, well, a Mac is more expensive, but it lasts longer versus a Windows. And I'm not going to get into that because people can do the numbers really. Financial advisors are smarter at money than me, so they can run those numbers, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Just like I said before, don't lease or don't rent hardware, but that's a separate topic altogether. Some security advantages. There is some really great built-in security features from Apple, but we still take that above and beyond. So we want to make sure that there's encryption on these MacBooks. We want to make sure we have the security wrap around, what's something called Defender for Endpoint. So we go ahead and we do that. But I think the biggest benefit in terms of using a Mac is the user experience, right? That this is what people want. And again, to be fair, Apple does a really good job of having some additional built-in security mechanisms. But in my opinion, that's not enough. We even take that a step further for the RIA. So we secure that, with some additional tools. So, just a little bit on that.
Nice. And so we've got all these new, security advantages, user experience. And so a lot of times, and this kind of go back to when we talked about Microsoft Office, it's the compatibility between, the programs or the web-based and all that stuff. So how well is Mac now playing in the world of, apps and software and all that good stuff? Is it still compatible? Are there still kind of a wall up between them and others?
Yeah, it works really. Now again, I'm talking about in the RIA space, right? In the
Sure.
medical
Yeah.
space or in other space, it might be totally different. But for me, I'm focused on, the listener who typically is a financial advisor or, works at an RIA. There are really no limitations. I mean, you could use a MacBook and you can be fully productive. And not, those old days of like, oh, I opened up a document in Word and now it's in Windows or, Word in Windows and Word in Apple. And that was a legitimate
Hmm.
concern.
Oh
Those are
yeah.
all, yeah, yeah. And it was a pain in the butt. The younger people today
Oh
do not
yeah.
appreciate some of the things that we had to deal with. And some of us like, hey, we need to be productive as a business, right? Like I care less that you like a MacBook. Like that's cool that
Hmm.
you like a Mac. Go use it at home. Here at work, we use Windows because we don't want to be dealing with compatibility issues, and we want to be
Yeah.
productive and streamlined. I can tell you that's gone. There's not like you're still going to have the typical, oh, I didn't do this or this is happening or this or that. But like those major, like I remember, getting a Word document from somebody who used a Mac. It was
Oh
like
yeah.
I needed to decrypt it somehow to open it on a Windows machine and vice versa. It was
Yeah.
ridiculous.
And I
Those
remember
are
too,
gone.
like, yeah, and I think it was when XL went to XLX, and then like you tried to get it on your Mac, and then you had to get it back to the XLX. It was just, I remember having to go through a website to convert my Mac document into the right
Yes.
Microsoft Word and then send it over. And then they'd have
Yes.
to send it back to me. Yeah. I remember that all the way in college. It was
Yeah.
so annoying. I can't even remember when Mac decided and Microsoft struck that deal to be like, look, let's kind of come together on this. But
I,
yeah, that was a godsend when it
yeah.
happened.
I think it's when Steve Jobs and Bill Gates became friends again.
Maybe if they stop poaching each other's employees. So
That's right. That's right. So, so the way that it's set up on a Mac, right? This is most of our clients, and this is even how I'm set up and we're set up. You're using the Microsoft 365. Your files are sitting on SharePoint. Everything is, everything is sitting in that environment. You're using the Microsoft ecosystem. So on the one end, you've got, what's called the Microsoft tenant or your private network at Microsoft, and on the other end, you have the computers or the Macs, and it doesn't really matter. A Mac plays really well with Microsoft, and a Windows computer plays really well with Microsoft, right? But that's kind of the typical setup that's there, and it works really well. And like I said, I jump between a Windows computer 4 days a week and then a MacBook 1 day a week, and it works really, really, really well. I'm fully productive. I don't miss a beat. The biggest challenge going from Windows to a Mac is just knowing all the shortcuts, right? Like I'm a power user on a Windows, and then I just have to learn sort of the Mac way. But that's not a limitation of the Mac. That's a limitation of David, because I don't know what those shortcuts are on the Mac, because traditionally I'm much more of a Windows user than a Mac user. So as a matter of fact, Todd, you might know all the shortcuts, and maybe I'll ask you for a cheat sheet afterwards.
I know a couple, but I will say what's wild is when I do see Mac power users and they're able to just like quickly click two buttons, keyboard buttons, and then like just kind of shift through apps on their screen and it goes right there. Specifically developers, those are they are crazy when they know these shortcuts on a Mac. I remember watching my old boss Nicole do this, and it was just so snappy for her just to switch between apps and programs. I
Yeah.
still have to like go down to the dock and figure out where they are or expand my whole window to get that stuff there. But yeah, no.
Yep. Yeah. 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 So I'm sort of like that on a window. Like I'm a power user on Windows, and I know all the shortcuts, and I'm like, oh, I don't need to use the mouse. But on a
Yeah,
Mac, when I'm using it, I'm like, hang on. I'm like the
yeah,
old guy. I'm like, hang on, where do I go and find this and that? And again, it's not a Mac limitation, it's a David limitation.
for
So
sure. So I know like when I used to be in big corporate America, there was always this compatibility off obviously, but it was, hey, like you were talking about, we're all on a Mac or we're all on a PC because we want to be able to seamlessly service all of these pieces of equipment and hardware and all that good stuff.
yep.
What is it? What are you seeing now as far as how IT is supporting, like you said, if you've got 10 RIAs and two of them probably are going to use a Mac, how do IT, teams deal with that, or what have you
Yep.
seen so far?
Yeah. So I think so. The first part of that question is what I'm seeing out there, and then the second part of that is you want to make sure you work with an IT company that actually does know how to support Macs. And I'm actually surprised at the number of IT companies out there that still don't support Macs. I feel like they're still stuck in the 80s. So but that's a separate topic. So I think most of our environment, most of our clients, and this is pretty typical. Again, 10 employees, 2 to 3 of them really prefer to use a MacBook, and they're going to use that, right? And we've got some clients where the leadership team's using a MacBook, but then the regular employees are using a Windows computer. We have some clients where a lot, and a lot of them are only using Windows, and that's fine. And then we have some, not a lot, probably less than 20% that are using all Macs, right? So it's Mac across the board. But again, even in those environments where it's all Macs, it's not like they're using Microsoft iCloud, or I'm sorry, Apple iCloud and and I forget what Apple calls their, version of like Word and Excel and PowerPoint. So
Oh, Pages,
yes, thank you.
Numbers, and
Yes,
Keynote. Yes.
yes, yeah. I don't use those. I don't use those. I use the
I
Office
use them
suite.
all the time.
You do? Okay. All right.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our clients that are using, like the Microsoft Office suite and then a MacBook, they're really using the Microsoft Office suite. And then as part of that, not saying you can't use anything else, but that's how they're using
Yeah.
that. Works really well. And, from that perspective, but I think going back to if you work with an IT company or an MSP out there, you definitely want to ask the question and say, hey, look, do you support Macs, right? And I'm sure they will tell you one way or the other. And if they don't, you may want to find, a partner that actually does support Macs, because again, it's very common to go ahead and do that. So yeah.
Nice. All right. And so let's if I and you're obviously in the field quite a bit, traveling and talking to people. Can you share some examples of real life or real world experiences of seeing, the Mac RAs running Macs successfully in their infrastructure alongside PCs, and, kind of the best practices you're seeing with them, and also any kind of challenges
Sure.
that you've seen them come across that they've overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think the going back to what we had talked about earlier, I think the biggest question is like, we're okay if we have 2 or 3 people that want to use Macs. However, we want to make sure we're making a smart decision. We want to make sure that these 2 or 3 employees are fully productive and we're not dealing with compatibility issues, right? And again, because you and I were joking around about the history of it, right? Most of our clients remember the history of it. It's like, dude, we got better things to do than to deal with, like, can I open up this Word document or not? Because it was, we're used
Oh
on a
yeah.
Mac. So we're way past that. Again, if you're using the Google Productivity Suite or the Microsoft Productivity Suite, both of those are going to work incredibly well with Macs and MacBooks. We're big fans of the Microsoft Office suite, nothing against Google, but we're fans of that. Works incredibly well. And I think what generally happens is the people that are smart Mac users, or have had an experience where they use Mac as a dumb terminal. And I don't do this on purpose, but they're like, hey, how do you do that on your Mac? Right. So I'll bring in my Mac and I'll just do a quick demo with them. And they're sort of blown away because now they're like, oh my goodness, I can open up Outlook for Mac and I can work. I'm
Yeah.
not using a quote unquote Windows computer, or using my Mac as a dumb terminal, right?
Yeah.
And they're blown away, and it always shocks me because this is what I'm used to, right? But I need to come from their world where they're like, oh yeah, the Mac. The best analogy is like, people that are Mac users are like second class citizens.
Oh yeah, I remember
And
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
welcome to our world. You could be first class, it's okay. You don't have to be a second class citizen. You can still, you can use a MacBook and you can be as productive and you can access all that right there. Now, as a bonus, what I will say too is I use an iPhone, I use an iPad, right? I can access the Microsoft applications. Again, if it's set up correctly, I can access the Microsoft applications for work, and I can be secure and I can be productive. And really, the big ones, the 2 big ones is people want to be able to access email on their iPhone or on their iPad. That's kind of the big one.
Yeah.
And then the second one is like, hey, my files and stuff like that. And what's really nice, the way we set that up for our clients is, if you want to use your iPhone and access company resources, we need to make sure that your iPhone meets a minimum IT compliance. So if your password is 1234, sorry, you can't access company Outlook, right? And then, so you need to have enough complexity to go ahead and access that. And then once you access work resources on your iPad or on your iPhone, it's a separate logical container that's separated from your personal one. And then if somebody works at your RIA and then leaves, right, we can do a remote wipe on everything that's work related on their iPhone, on their iPad, and stuff like that. So I didn't necessarily want to get into an iPhone and iPad, but this is kind of a bonus thing. And then again, the same would apply if it was like an Android or a different type of tablet. But just again, to just recap, um, the way that we set up our clients and the way that our clients are working. And even if you're not a client of ours, it's okay. If you're using the Microsoft Office suite, or if you're using the Google Productivity Suite, this is going to work really, really, really well on your Mac, and or Macs will work really well. The 2 things to look out for, right? Catch number one is, are you using any server-based applications, right? And if you are, you want to be careful, work with an IT partner that can kind of get you set up the right way. So that's catch number one. And then catch number two is, just make sure your IT provider is comfortable supporting you if you decide to have some employees on a Mac, right? Those are the kind of 2 those are the 2 things to look for that are red flags. Other than that, it works fantastic. And I would highly recommend that if that is your preference,
Mhm.
is using a MacBook. So
So there you go. I mean, everybody can take a breath. we are now in 2024, and Macs and Microsoft world will play well together. So that's great. And do you have any of this literature and other resources like on the website that we can put in the show notes, David, that the listeners can read up on, or get some more information on how that works back and forth?
Yeah, we'll definitely include the this podcast in the, well, actually, you know what? Just go to the Learning Center, right, and type in MacBook or type in Apple in the search, and you're gonna get a lot of literature around that. That's probably the easiest thing to do. So to go to www.riaworkspace.com and then click on the Learning Center, and then just type in Apple or Mac, and then you'll get a lot of literature that's around that, and then you can just kind of poke around on what you're interested in learning. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, David, as always, it was fun taking the trip with you today, especially between the Macs and the Microsoft worlds. I'm sure people have plenty of comments of that, so please join our conversation, put it in the show notes, send us an email. We always love hearing from you guys. And as David said, go to the Learning Center at riaworkspace.com and just search whatever kind of topics you want. Or for this one, just search in Mac or Apple, and you'll get some great resources there. So as always, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to the RIA Tech Talk podcast, brought to you by, of course, RIA Workspace. And so for David and myself, thanks so much. We'd love to hear from you. So feel free to send us a note or an email. And always stay tuned for more RIA Tech Insights in our next episode. We'll see you guys later. Have a great day.